Camera.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to this eCornell keynote. I'm Jason Judd. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Labor Institute in the School of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell University. This keynote is global gender-based violence in global supply chains. We're going to have an assessment of the impacts of the Dindigul Agreement. This will be the first airing of findings from my colleague at Cornell, Professor Sarosh Kuravila, who has analyzed the Dindigul Agreement. It's a first of its kind framework for the elimination of gender-based violence in the apparel industry. In this case, in Dindigul, a city in Tamilnadu in southern India. It's of special importance for us because it's an agreement hammered out by unions and labor NGOs, apparel brands, and an apparel producer. And gender-based violence is of special interest here because globally in the apparel industry, more than half of all workers are women. So as this Dindigul Agreement concludes, we'd like to hear from Sarosh about his findings, and then have a discussion with a panel, many of whom were involved in the implementation of the agreement. So for this, we've got just 1 hour. I'm going to invite Sarosh to present his findings, and then I'll introduce, and we'll bring in a panel for a discussion of what they mean. After that, we'll have back and forth with you in the audience. So feel free to start putting your questions into the Q&A. All right, first I'll introduce Sarosh and invite him to present his findings. Sarosh Kuravila is the Andrew Nathanson Family Professor of Industrial Relations in the ILR School at Cornell University, and he's also the academic director of the Global Labor Institute, part of the ILR School. Sarosh?
Okay, good morning, everyone. I want to talk a little bit about the origins of the Dindigul Agreement. This was following the rape and murder of a worker in the Dindigul factory. Her name was Jayasree Kathirvel. And following that, there was a global campaign led by Global Labor Justice, an American NGO, an international NGO, the Asia Floor Wage Alliance, which is an Asia-based labor alliance led by trade unions, and the Tamilnadu Textile and Common Labor Union, whose state president is on this panel today. So the key focus of the agreement is the elimination or to ending of gender-based violence in the factory. And it's important to highlight that the key focus here is eliminating or ending gender-based violence through freedom of association. Freedom of association is the key element of this program. Okay, so I was asked to evaluate this agreement. The simple question was, is it working? Is it replicable? And is it scalable? So 3 questions. I want to focus my comments on the first question right now, which is it working? I was contracted to do this by the Oversight Committee of the Dindigul Agreement, which the committee is representative of most of the stakeholders in the agreement, and the past chair of the Oversight Committee, Kushanti, is also on this panel today. Okay. Now, getting to the agreement itself, it is an agreement with many different moving parts. Okay, there is training for workers. There is the establishment of a multi-channel grievance system. Then there are shop floor monitors, worker shop floor monitors, worker representatives who call out gender-based violence issues on the shop floor, and they sometimes solve problems even before it becomes a grievance. There's freedom of association, there's the union, and there's relationships between the union and the management, which are quite key, as I will show you briefly. And then there's the interaction of all of these with the Indian government's POSH Act, the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act, which requires the formation of a committee headed by a senior female manager and with external representatives. And in this case, there were two outstanding, very knowledgeable external representatives who created the kind of discourse in the factory that enabled workers to sort of understand the nuances of gender-based violence. Okay, so that's why this is a complex agreement with lots of moving parts. There was also an implementation committee that also resolved some problems in the initial stages. So that's the nature of the agreement with all of its parts. Now, what the answer to the question, does it work? I have several bits of evidence to suggest that it works. The first thing is extensive training. The report, which is on our website, lists the number of training programs, but the key issue here is that the workers' awareness of gender-based violence and harassment and their rights, especially their freedom of association rights, was very high. And we talked to the women workers in the community and in the factory, and it was clear that they knew and they understood the nuances involved in gender-based violence. What is consent? What things like that, which was important. The second bit of evidence is that the workers were raising grievances. Now we have at least 46 grievances on gender-based violence over in the last year. And the number of grievances about gender-based violence have been increasing. And that is not a bad sign, it's actually a good sign, because it shows that workers are unafraid to raise gender-based grievances, violence grievances. Not only is there an increase in gender-based violence grievances, there's also an increase in grievances of all kinds. In the last year, there were more than 600 grievances raised. And that's also evidence that the workers, who are mostly women workers in the factory, by the way, evidence that they are unafraid to raise grievances. And they are unafraid to raise grievances in part because there is a labor union at their back that protects them. A third bit of evidence is a very, very speedy resolution of grievances. Most gender-based violence grievances are solved within a day, and with the rare ones taking a month. And most other grievances are solved within 2 weeks. And this amazing speed of grievance resolution is largely due to the fact that the labor union, the TTCU, and the management of the Nachi factory, Eastman, have an excellent relationship. And the evidence of this excellent relationship can be seen in the fact that the labor union leader, Divya, enters the factory, has unfettered access. I think the last year she must have entered the factory about 140 times. And each time she enters the factory, there is a discussion with Eastman management. So the labor management collaboration is fostered by almost, regular meetings. And I think in year 2, there were 253 meetings in the year. In year 3, there was slightly less, but there's a regularity that has built this strong collaborative relationship in the factory. So those are more evidence that it's working. The union is the preferred channel, and union and the company are preferred channels for raising grievances. And they raise grievances with both these organizations. And union management dialogue is the preferred channel for the remediation of grievances. Okay. I've already mentioned that the key role played by shop floor monitors, and we're talking with those monitors. I was amazed at how positive they were about their roles in the factory in terms of solving these problems and pointing them out earlier. There are indirect effects of the agreement, which is also evidence that it's working. One is the increase in productivity, because the grievance system raises all kinds of issues, not just solving workers' problems, but solving management's problems too, each of which is increased productivity. There is very clear evidence that absenteeism in the factory has declined over the 3 years of the life of the agreement. So that's and the final bit of evidence is that there's a high degree of worker trust, not only in the union, which they trusted before because the union was active in the villages and so on, but also in the management. So the high degree of worker trust in union and management is the final bit of evidence that I can suggest that shows that the agreement is working for workers, definitely. It is not clear that the agreement is working for management, because once the agreement has started working, we haven't seen increased orders from brands. But on all other aspects, this is a wonderful agreement. It's one of a kind. This would be a perfect factory from which to source, because it ticks the boxes on freedom of association. It ticks the boxes on gender-based violence. So it's a little bit of a puzzle as to why more brands don't go rushing in there. But I will stop there.
All right. Thank you, Sarosh. Let me introduce the panel, and then we'll go around. We'll go around the virtual room here, asking each of them to offer their reactions to Sarosh's analysis, and then we'll go a couple of more rounds. Then we'll start taking questions from you in the audience. You can put questions into the Q&A. All right. Let me introduce first Krishanti Damaraj, who is the former independent chair of the Dindigul Agreement Oversight Committee. She's joined by Divya Rakini, who is the state president of the Tamilnadu Textile and Common Labor Trade Union. And thirdly, Kelly Faye Rodriguez, who is a visiting fellow at Cornell University, but most recently, the special representative in the US State Department for International Labor Affairs. So for each of you, the same question. What's your reaction to what you've just heard, what you've read in Sarosh's analysis? Krishanti, you're first.
Thank you. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to everyone. Thank you, Sarosh, for working with the Oversight Committee with great partnership to deliver this report, and also for inviting me here. I think one of the things when Sarosh spoke that I want to also recognize is that gender-based violence work has been happening before the Dindigul Agreement in different forms. For example, Afwa's Safe Circle approach, TTCU, Divya is here, has been pioneering the work around bringing in intimate partner violence, otherwise known as domestic violence, into the framework of worker rights and workers' lives when we are talking about gender-based violence. Many other organizations such as RISE have programs that are addressing gender-based violence. There's something unique about the Dindigul Agreement, I would say, that from a human rights term, we would say that is interdependent and interrelated, right? And Sarosh spoke to this. One is the multi-tiered grievance process, right? That it is multi-tiered and it's fluid. The other one is the integration of international standards, which really allowed TTCU to elevate its work around, for example, gender-based violence in the home and connecting into gender-based violence in the world of work, right? Particularly ILO C-190 that gives the definition of what gender-based violence and harassment is, along with the world of work, and including other aspects of it. And freedom of association, right? And the collaborative labor management relations, and then the shared commitment of the multi-stakeholders. I think it's important to recognize that, and I go back to what Sarosh said. This has been an extraordinary opportunity for us to learn and grow, and I applaud the courage, and very specifically of Eastman and TTCU, for the work they have done on the ground that is sustainable, and for the brands who had the courage to join this process, which is Gap Inc., H&M and PVH. I hope this courage is contagious. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Prashanti. Divya, your reactions.
You're muted.
Hi and hello to everyone. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. I'm happy to wish everyone, despite of different time zones. It is really very grateful, and really laborers are honored because I as a labor representative, I'm being invited to this program itself. It gives us a lot of privilege and honor to be here. I think this in having been into this agreement, it is a real wonderful relationship and lot of learnings from the workers' purview. That what I am very proud of under the Dindigul Agreement is the productive and trust-based relationship that TTCU and Eastman have built over time. Because none of us compromised our values, and yet we achieved what was needed for both workers' dignity and for factories' smooth functioning. This is what really makes us very proud. And it is true that it was unfortunate events that brought us, the brands and Eastman, together to sign the Dindigul Agreement. But what is remarkable is how much we all evolved after that to really understand each other's perspectives, both the industry side and the workers' side. One of the biggest strength of this process has been the regular weekly meetings between TTCU and Eastman's management. I especially want to thank HR manager of Eastman, Sakti Saravanan, and VP Alagason from Eastman side for consistently coming in good faith to every one of these meetings. Because of these discussions, grievances never grew too big, and even when serious issues like sexual harassment were reported, they were nipped in the bud through prompt discussion and action. And these meetings were not just for workers' issues with management, they were also space where management could raise their concerns with us. It was truly a two-way street. For example, I can say that once management said that some workers, even though assigned to stitch undergarments, were refusing to do that work. I immediately went to the factory, and we all sat together, workers, the union, and the management, to talk it through. What we found was that the lower level management had not clearly explained why these changes have made, and workers assumed they were being treated unfairly because they were used to stitching only t-shirts. Once, when everything was calmly discussed with workers, both sides understood each other and production resumed very smoothly. This might sound like a small issue, but these are exactly the kinds of misunderstandings that affect industrial relations in the long run. Instead of letting tensions grow, the weekly meeting system allowed for continuous dialogue and quick problem solving. It built habits of communication that prevented conflicts before they escalated. And now people often ask me, why do you need a union for this? And can't workers and management talk directly? What is the special role that you are doing about? The truth is the power imbalance is too great in the factory floor. Without a union, workers will not speak freely to management. They are afraid of losing jobs, of retaliation, and not being believed. Possible. The second reason the industrial relations under this agreement have worked so well is the senior management's buy-in. The owner himself told his team, work with the union. This message from the top encouraged the lower and mid-level managers to do the right thing, to sit down with workers, listen, and find solutions rather than act out of fear or ego. This shift is in attitude from the top leadership to the supervisors really enabled the union and management to work together at all levels. And finally, what we truly made the Dindigul Agreement successful is that both factory and management, TTCU also gave it time and stayed committed. Even when things were difficult, we were able to stand united to claim for the factory and for the workers. Industrial relations don't change overnight, and it takes patience and faith. Many companies still mistrust unions, thinking we come to disrupt the factories. But that is not true. We want factories to run because without them, there are no jobs. And without jobs, women cannot support their families. Our goal is to make sure the problems don't grow large enough to harm either the workers or the industry. That takes trust, consistency, and long-term collaboration where both sides understand that some issues and urgent action while others need time and dialogue. And that understanding, that willingness to stay in the same table is what has kept the Dindigul Agreement alive and meaningful. This has given wonderful opportunity and proud to work for the workers within the factory premises. Thank you.
All right, good. Thank you, Divya. Kelly, over to you. Your reactions to what Sarosh presented, what you've heard.
Thank you, Jason, and thanks so much to Divya and Krishanti and Sarosh for the chance to participate in this conversation. The Dindigul Agreement is one that I've followed closely for several years in past roles, really since its inception, and I've been grateful to be able to use it as a model when I talk to companies and governments and workers around the world about what is possible for workers in the workplace to try to forge these kinds of models. And what I think is really clear from the data that Sarosh articulated, the freedom of association aspect was instrumental, integral, and continues to be a key part of why this model is effective. The mature and productive relationship between labor and management that really emerged from this agreement it's a tremendous success and really a result of an agreement that prioritized freedom of association and empowerment of women workers. I really valued Sarosh's data points on the grievance mechanism and really clearly stating that the increase in utilization of these mechanisms is evidence that it's working, right? It's evidence that the union has the proper engagement and support from the company, that the workers have the buy-in of the union, that the union has the buy-in of the workers as well. And I really appreciate Divya's point about the power dynamics. I worked with garment workers in Bangladesh for years and in Guatemala and Honduras, right? And what is clear in all of those examples is the power dynamics is the obstacle. And that's why you need, and not all programs, not all programs really centralize union participation. I think Dindigul really demonstrates why and how unions need to be a partner and a key stakeholder in any kind of model to address gender-based violence, or frankly, any workplace issues in supply chains, particularly in garment. I appreciated the mentioning of the shop floor monitors, right? Like I certainly have seen in my experiences in other places when a worker learns the tools they need to really exercise their rights to use their own voice to contribute not just to their own experience in the workplace, right? But also to the resiliency, the productivity of the business. It's transformative, truly. And that was evident just from hearing Divya's description of what the day-to-day looks like for her and for the workers on the ground. And that wasn't the case always, right? Before the agreement, that was definitely not the case. Surely wasn't the case for workers who experienced all kinds of harassment and workplace abuses. So I think the power dynamics is really just very visceral and clear in the presentation. And I really also appreciate the acknowledgement of worker dignity, and that is key to the company's ability, again, to remediate, prevent, and address gender-based violence and harassment in the workplace, and also other workplace disputes, and as well as to the other business benefits that Sarosh articulated in productivity and reduction in absenteeism. Just really important and key examples for us to keep in mind, to celebrate and to also continue supporting as Dindigul, as the Dindigul Agreement enters its next phase.
All right, good. Thank you, Kelly. Sarosh, do you want to react to any of that? Do you have something to add?
Just make one 2 points that worth making. One is that we have to remember these are women workers. This is a woman-led, female-led trade union, with officers are female, and that's important. It's important because this is what makes gender issues rise to the fore in their consciousness. Male-led labor unions may not, have the same GBVH issues may not have the same salience, and I think that's important. It's one important thing to say. The second is that, because of this particular union being active in the community as well as in the factory, there is a way that they're able to deal with that fluidity of gender-based violence at home and gender-based violence at work. And I think this, which is kind of consistent with C-190, the convention, that one has to recognize that it happens in both places, and it's recognized here. But I will stop there and let you continue, Jason.
All right, thank you, Sarosh. Okay, let's take up a related question. Each of you, from your perspective, could you talk about the changes that you've seen as a result of the agreement? Divya, you spoke about changes at work. Could you talk a little bit about changes in the other aspects of workers' lives, in their homes, in their communities?
Yeah, to be very honest, when I first signed the Dindigul Agreement, I never imagined the kind of ripple impact it would create. But now, after 3 years, I can truly see how much has changed, not only inside the factories, but also in the lives and communities of women workers. The beauty of this agreement, especially the shop floor monitor system and other provisions, is that it gives women workers, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds, the confidence that their voices matter. They have seen that when they speak up, they are heard wherever they are. The confidence and the opportunity to come together collectively across caste, villages, and even religions is a powerful thing that we see. And confidence, once gained, does not stay limited to the workplace alone. It spreads into every part of life. Or women who once felt powerless are now standing up against domestic violence, caste discrimination, and even corruption in their own communities. We have seen so many stories of transformation. Some women who faced domestic violence have found the courage to walk out of abusive marriages, which is not at all easy in our conservative society. A few women even went alone to the police station to file complaints against domestic violence cases. You might think that it is a small thing, but these are some of the first women in their villages to ever do that. Many women who came from who became as shop floor monitors have felt that they can study and achieve more, so they have gone back to school and or joined adult education classes like they have felt. Others have filed petitions with with their own panchayats to get roads repaired, to ensure their regular water for their villages, or to demand better sanitation facilities. And remember, in these village councils, Dalit women are often not even allowed to speak up before men or before nearly government officials. Yet these women, through the collective confidence gained under this agreement, have now collectively fought for toilets, roads, and other basic needs, and they have won that in favor of them. The confidence they have gained through this process is not just personal, it is political, power political. They know now they can use public institutions wherever it is, the police or the village council, or in the panchayats, the governments, to raise grievances and demand this. All of this shows something very important, that real change doesn't come just from being told about their rights and laws alone. It comes from having the confidence and collective strength to exercise those rights in their places wherever they live in. That is what makes the Dindigul Agreement so different. It is not just a workplace policy or training. It is a process that helps women to discover their power and dignity. And that transformation has now reached far beyond the factory gates into homes, villages, and the very fabric of our communities. And it is something very, very beautiful to see in the day-to-day life of the workers in their villages, especially from the very local poor and rural villages, where they even struggle for their everyday transportation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Divya. Excellent. Krishanti, from your perspective, what could you talk a little bit about the changes you've seen, including reactions beyond Dindigul in the wider world?
Thank you. And I think I'll pick up from Divya around addressing gender-based violence. I think it's important to kind of recognize, first of all, that when women face violence and when there's a threat of violence, there's tremendous amount of self-censorship, right? In how women approach life, right? What the work on the ground and Dindigul, particularly in how the work has been implemented, has been showing us is that women have now engaged in occupying space, right, with courage, with tenacity, with their inherent right to dignity, right? So gender-based violence and addressing gender-based violence was the entry point for these women based on what Divya has said, right? And it has now transformed them and therefore transformed the factory and the industry at large and the country, because some of these women are running for office at the lower level, right? So I think, I mean, imagine that one factory, they understand what it means to address violence. They're able to speak up in a safe environment that has been provided, right, due to freedom of association by both the union and the management, and by exercising that right to stand up for their bodily integrity, right? And the courage to say no. Now they have moved that beyond that factory, right? That is how change and transformation occurs. And I think we cannot undermine that. That in itself is tremendously powerful. I think the other one that I'd like to bring up is the multi-stakeholder engagement, right? Because we can't take that for granted either. I mean, there is a oversight committee, and the oversight committee, typically these are folks that could be adversarial, right? There are brands, there's a union, there are workers, there's factory management, and there are NGOs who work on labor and supporting women's rights, but all of them coming together. And I think it's a great lesson for us, particularly in this time and place in the world, that we must work together, that collective power is far greater than individual accomplishments. And collectively, it might be more complex, it might take longer to make decisions, but we are moving in the same directions, right? At the end of the day, it's about the worker, the ability for the worker to be able to do their best and to create conditions and ensure that environment is safe, and not that workers could merely survive, but they could thrive. And I think that we have been able to see in the Dindigul space. So I will,
All right, good.
over
Thank
to
you,
you,
Lisa.
Kelly.
Yeah, Kelly?
Yeah, wise words. I mean, echo the sentiment of both Divya and Krishanti for sure on this. It brings me back to the earlier days of the agreement, and what the situation was like before the union had a seat at the table with management, and what it took, right? Krishanti mentioned the need for coordination, collaboration amongst all stakeholders. I think now more than ever, we see the importance of international solidarity amongst labor advocates and organizations, as well as private sector, the brands and the companies, to be able to address these really entrenched obstacles. I recall, in my prior role, I served as a trade counsel in Congress with oversight over the Customs and Border Protection and their enforcement of 307, the trade policy that prohibits the import of goods made in part, wholly or in part, with forced labor. And I remember the Dindigul Agreement was finalized just months before the withhold release order was issued by the US government. And I got to see how important it was, both for Thivia and the workers on the ground, the company and the brands, as well as the global labor advocates, to be able to come together to demonstrate how and why the indicators of forced labor no longer existed in the factory, thereby opening, the U.S. consumer market for Eastman Exports, right? That really hard to imagine that happening without the coordination and commitment from all of the stakeholders. Again, the brands, the company management, and the workers and global union organizations, right? And I think, when you look at some of the reporting, of course, with the tragic murder of Jayashar, and the report I recall WRC put out about the Eastman trying to install a protection union or a company union, right? Those factors, those things we see all over the place all the time. Those kinds of obstacles to workers being able to exercise their rights. And in this case, it really was a matter of the support and the recognition, the respect for Thivia and the workers that allowed all of these stakeholders to ensure that the company could continue to produce, to export to major global markets, and really created the groundwork for, or enabled the groundwork for the workers to really thrive, as Krishanti mentioned, right? It's that unique sort of collaboration between the stakeholders that was really key here, and that we've really only we've seen in a few other places, but we really need to see more of. I think also I want to mention just a quote here, from the report that struck me, that without clear brand alignment and support through sourcing, the burden of advancing these programs falls on worker organizations where they exist, and most acutely on the women who speak out about GBVH, right? And again, this is something that brands have the capacity to do more of, to foster as the key buyers from factories like Eastman, and we need to be engaging them proactively. We really need to see more come to the table with proposals and a commitment to ensure that GBVH no longer exists in their supply chains, but that worker rights and standards allow workers to thrive as they do right now with the TTCU members.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Sarosh, I want to go to you. I've had a question in the Q&A here from Marina. Maybe you can answer it in your response. One of the changes she asks about is has GBVH served as a gateway to raise other grievances, and was this expected? So have workers been able to raise grievances and even bargain to improve wages, for example, or working conditions? What are some of the knock-on effects of the transformation in the factory that you've been talking that we've all been hearing about?
Yes, I mean, it's GB, I think Krishanti already mentioned this. GBVH was also the entry point. So the agreement happened because of GBVH. And a key part of the agreement was freedom of association. This is the first time that the union was recognized and operating in the factory. And so while the training and the awareness and all of the work that Divya and her group have done with women workers made them more aware, but it also gave them more confidence to raise GBVH grievances. But once they started raising GBVH grievances, they found that the resolution was happening. This was working, and so they started raising all kinds of grievances. I mean, in the first year, the number of other grievances were quite low, right? But in the second year, those grievances shot up, and they raised grievances directly to the management, but also through the union. So yes, it was definitely a gateway into a more productive industrial relations situation. And strangely enough, some of the grievances are actually raised by management. If you look at the grievance record, there's this grievance about work where the management seeks the union's help in solving a particular issue. So that's also comes into the grievance record, right? So this is really a segue into productive industrial relations, which may not have happened without an original problem around which the stakeholders coalesced. Yes. So yes, definitely.
All right, good. One last question from me for all of you, and I'll work in here a question that we've had another question we've had in the Q&A from Sumati. My question is about scale and replication. Can this agreement or agreements like it be replicated elsewhere and on a large scale? The question that we've had is what's going on with the brands? What's the role of brands in helping to replicate and scale agreements like this? And a second question: what's the role of the state here? Shanti, do you want to start first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Before I speak about scale and replicability, I wanted to kind of frame the implementation of Dindigul Agreement in a way that shows how and when to scale or replicate, right? Now, the implementation, when I think about implementation, I look at TTCU and its relationship to Eastman Exports and how they work together, right? And in that work, one of the things I think to really acknowledge what Eastman Exports did was to have a vertical approach to this particular implementation and integration. That meant that the leadership, the high-ups, right, acknowledged, recognized, and integrated it and committed to it, right? When the CEO, comes and sits within the oversight committee, that sends a very strong message. Okay, so within that, the company in itself, all the tiers integrated this process, recognized it, right? Whether it's the VP of sustainability to the factory. So there was a vertical approach. When everyone recognizes it, that means that the institution itself is pivotal to change, right? It's extraordinary recognition that should not be ignored, right? From a horizontal standpoint, it allowed TTCU to be very fluid, right? Now, when you think about the definition of the world of work, and typically trainings happen inside factories, but particularly taking the definition of the world of work from ILO C-190, Thivya was able to engage with drivers, go into hostels, right? Engage in village and within the factory. Now, that is how I think change happens, right? So that is the model that we are saying that should be indivisible and interdependent, that we should recognize with the element that Sarosh spoke to, right? So if you're thinking about replicability, safety happens on the ground level. Safety is tangible. It is felt. It is experienced, right? And that happens and that happened in Dindigul because of the strength and the leadership and the commitment, the political will of, TTCU being able to engage in that process, right? Fluidly recognizing the importance of the workers, and it was getting management to recognize it and moving forward in being productive and ensuring that the workers could be productive in that space, and Eastman being able to work with them, right? And I think that is the work that happened to make safety possible, right? So saying that, I have to also say that, gender-based violence is scalable and has been scaled, right? And I think, and we are looking at civil, political, economic, social, and cultural spheres. It has transcended borders. And we have to recognize in that context, right, that the killing of Jayashree is femicide. Okay, it was femicide in the world of work, right? And it is not limited to Dindigul, right? So while gender-based violence has been scaled up, the solutions cannot be packaged, right? However, the steps taken within the Dindigul Agreement that is interdependent and interrelated can be utilized to address gender-based violence, both the recognition of it at a higher scale and the implementation and the replicability at the lower level.
All right, good. Thivya, would you talk about this question, the ability to scale, to replicate and scale agreements like this in other factories, in other places?
Of of course, the replicability and scalability is why I look into different way. It is not even 100%, 200% very positive and very effective for the workers and for the industry. But when there is no sourcing, like the continuity of that is which it really lacks. Then also the recent tariff that is increased that the job loss of the workers and these things. But definitely I would say, because the factory knew very well how it was before the agreement and during the agreement. Even now after the agreement, the management want us to continue the same thing, like, so that much we have made that effect. It works very well. Even you were also asking about the government also asked for this agreement, how it works despite of post act and existing ICC committees, what all the special requirements that still exist in this agreement. That is what we were asked to present the agreement by the Labor Department, the State Secretary. Then we were presenting about this agreement, and some of the components were being taken by the government to evolve and to take into other forms, whatever the government is already doing. Like, so definitely it is scalable and replicable, but provided that needs to be supported. I am very much happy to insist here that such factories, which is because Eastman had the gut to engage with us, despite of all, none of the factory wants to engage with the union, but still the Eastman had the gut to, and they had to collaborate with us, and they have proved a model factory that has to be recognized by all the brands, not only the signatory brands or H&M, whenever whoever is the agreement parties or not. I think this has to be rewarded, this has to be scaled, and this has to be replicated, and it is a very good effective model. The grievance redressal mechanism more than 500% works very well. Also the cultural and behavioral change that has brought within the mid-management, top management, and by the drivers, the contract drivers, what is required for them to undergo such trainings. The gender, because the Tamilnadu is very much caste proven and patriarchy system. I think the cultural and behavioral change that we have brought under this agreement, so definitely that needs to be scaled and replicated.
All right, good, thank you. We've got just 5 minutes left. I want to get Kelly's answer to this question. The need is clear. What makes scale and replication possible? What gets in the way?
Great question. And agree again with the sisters on the call on everything they've said. I think I'd just like to highlight, as Krishanti mentioned, GBVH has already gone to scale in the sector. I think that's an excellent point. And, we're seeing increasingly, and we've seen in recent years, governments and private sector really reckon with the reality that more needs to be done from the top. I also very much agree that it needs to be a vertical approach in the private sector where we see leadership prioritize both ending GBVH, but the collective power component and freedom of association in particular. I mean, it's a real easy one for companies to say that they respect freedom of association in their supply chain, but unless they're actually engaging with unions directly, whether it's global union federations, national unions, or at the factory level, unless they're doing that rigorous engagement and actually establishing protocols such as grievance mechanisms, those are just words, right? The meaningfulness is not there, which is why we've seen the European Union seek out due diligence legislation, why we see more proactive engagement from brands and companies around the UNGPs, and the need to really have more robust systems in place to protect freedom of association, to ensure that PVH and unions such as TTCU have the ability to break through those cultural norms and obstacles to really create culture change that is needed. And, you know, I saw this in government. I saw the difference between when the president joined workers on strike or spoke out in favor of worker rights, or the Secretary of State did. We, under the Biden administration, issued the first ever presidential memo directing for our US government agencies to promote workers and unions in US foreign policy, right? Those kinds of signals from the top need to happen, again, to create the space for culture change to happen on the ground. So we need that from other governments. We need that from brands, you know, and I would just say we often talk, when we talk about the Bangladesh Accord for worker safety, we talk about how we hope we don't have to lose another 1,000 workers' lives to force the stakeholders to come up with these agreements to actually commit and produce results for workers. You know, there should never be another Jayashri experience in the garment sector anywhere, right? We don't need to have another tragedy happen for brands and companies to do the right thing. We've got the lessons learned here from this agreement. We've seen other places where workers and unions have really been committed to creating the necessary conditions, the union and management collaboration and structure, the grievance mechanisms, the resources for the union and the NGOs to be able to support community through these changes. We've seen that in places like Lesotho. We've seen it happen in Bangladesh through the Accord even. And so it can happen again. We need the brands, we need the companies to really create the space for this kind of thing to succeed, and to bring community and labor unions along with them.
All right, good. Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah.
We have got just 2 minutes left. I want to ask Sarosh for your final thoughts, perhaps on this question of replicability and scalability, and then I'll ask Prashanti for a final thought. Sarosh.
I think I said what I wanted to say in the report, so I would suggest that's the place to find the answer to that question. But it's important to highlight that the Dindigul Agreement has many different moving parts, and my worry is that people will read this report and sort of say, "Hey, there's this part of the agreement that I like, and I'm going to sort of take shop floor monitors from here and put them somewhere else." And I think it's important to understand that in Dindigul, what Dindigul has shown is that they're all interrelated. They're codependent. This is, and it has become a self-sustaining ecosystem. And the glue that holds it all together is labor management collaboration. So I think it's important. You can't isolate and take one thing and put it somewhere else. So that's on the replicability side. And on scalability, perhaps it needs to be part of an accord, because that seems to be the only scalable agreement in the garment sector that we have seen. And so maybe that's an option.
All right, good. Thank you. Prashanti, final thought.
Thank you. I want to really recognize the designers, the people who had the vision before it was realized, like Global Labor Justice, Asia Flow Wage Alliance, and TTCU. Without them, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about it 3 years later. So thank you for their vision. And to me, I think it's really important to recognize that safety is a practice, right? And without addressing gender-based violence in the garment sector, right, we will not be able to actually sustain the industry for the long term. Because with climate change, crises, migration, with all of that, anytime the world sees something happen, including, our collective experience of COVID, right? Gender-based violence increases. It increases because women worker lives are considered disposable, and it's devalued. So addressing gender-based violence to ensure safety in the garment industry will benefit everyone. Thanks.
Good. All right. Thank you, Prashanti. Thank you to the four of you. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your thoughtful answers. And thanks to the audience and their questions. That's all.